Hi, my name is Stephanie Duarte, and this is my audiovisual assignment on the Republic of Plato for the class of POT 3003. For this audiovisual assignment, we are presented with the scenario that it's the upcoming 2024 presidential elections. Three candidates emerge. The first one being a war hero who is running on his qualifications that he has a keen sense of war and peace that would help keep America safe in an era of global conflict. The second emerging candidate is the philosopher. The philosopher claims to be up to par and qualified due to their understanding of the nature of reality, which has paved the way and given them access to the external truths that underlines all human and natural existence. And finally, the third candidate that emerged was the businessman. He claims to be the most qualified due to his keen market sense and his ability to turn his struggling business around and post annual profits for several years running. Now, in order to adequately be able to answer this question, we must first start from the beginning. Starting from the beginning where Socrates is first drafting his perfect state. So in this perfect state, Socrates sets out three distinct classes. The first one is the trader. The next is the auxiliary/warrior. And the third is the guardian. Now, bearing the question at hand in mind and the scenario given, we can attribute the businessman to the trader, given that business is his trade. And due to honor and courage, we can attribute the war hero to the auxiliary/warrior. And lastly, the guardian can be attributed to the philosopher. Now, we would specifically place the philosopher in the guardian spot because in quote 1, Plato states that the guardian must possess qualities like that of the philosopher. Now, quote 1 specifically is located in Book 2, 375e. Then, Socrates goes to establish that the detriment of the state would land in the interchanging and meddling of each of these, which means that the trader can't just force his way into the auxiliary/warrior position, and the auxiliary/warrior position can't force their way into the guardian or the legislator position. This example is seen in quote 2, book 4, 434b. Socrates then establishes in quote 3 that if each of these positions sticks to their own business and doesn't focus or try to go into a different business, the city will be just, which is therefore the ultimate goal. And this specific quote is found in Book 4, 434c. Next, Plato establishes the noble lie. Now, this quote can specifically be found in Book 3, 415a, and it is quote number 4. So in the noble lie, it's basically stating that though we're all brothers alike, we are separated into three different categories. That category being either gold, silver, or iron and brass. In the noble lie quote, Plato states that some are born with the power of command, those being gold, and those not having the power of command but having honor, great honor, can be classified into the silver category, otherwise known as auxiliaries. Lastly, those who are husbandmen and craftsmen have been classified into the iron and brass category. Bearing this question in mind and the scenario given, we can classify the businessmen as the iron and brass. We can do this because Within iron and brass, there is a care for the wealth and the goods of the world. The businessman in his candidacy claims that he is superior because he flipped his company. He made it from unsuccessful into successful and started generating profits. And the sole fact that he cares about those profits is why he is here. Next, we have the silver category. And here we can put the war hero. In the Noble I quote 4, that we previously quoted, we stated that the war hero has great honor, but they weren't commanded for power. Next, Plato goes on to state that until philosophers are not the kings and princes of the world, an example, the state, the city will not rest from its evils. This is found in quote 5, book 5, 473, C through E, where it states that philosophers are the ones that should be in the command of charge. So therefore, we can put the philosopher candidate where the gold is. We have already established from the drafting of the state that the guardian is the one that has gold in their soul. Therefore, the guardian and the philosopher are in a way synonymous. Now, this is further explained in book 2, 375E, quote number 6, where it states that the guardian, or the individual who is fit to be guardian, must have the qualities like that of the philosopher. But now let's go into talking about what's expected of the philosopher and the leader, and essentially their way of life. Now in quote 7, book 3, 416 D through E, the life of the philosopher, the guardian, the gold is highlighted. They do not have a right to own any property, nor should they want to. They don't have the right to their own home, and they have an established fare that comes from the citizens that helps them meet their bare necessities. And when I say that they don't have a right, I mean that they don't have the need for it. They don't want it. Unlike iron and brass, the businessman, where he wants to be successful and make wealth and essentially enjoy the goods of life. Now, on to the next quote. In quote 8 from book 3, 414b, it specifically states that the word guardian should only be attributed to the highest class, that being gold. And silver, auxiliaries, should be the class that further supports the rulers in their principles. Therefore, going back to our scenario, Plato would not pick the businessman as the ideal presidential candidate, for we can establish that in quote 9, book 3, 415c, Plato states that if an individual from iron and brass were to guard the state, it would destroy the state. And if the war hero were to fall within the silver category, that is meant to merely support the principles established by the leaders, then you could already cross off the war hero, just like we crossed off the businessman. Therefore, the only candidate left is the philosopher. And this would be the ideal candidate that Plato would pick. Now, in Plato's eyes, what qualifies the philosopher is their ability to grasp the eternal and unchangeable. Now, the quote that directly relates this from Plato is quote number 10, and it comes from book 6, 484b. In this upcoming presidential election, the candidate that's a philosopher claims to be qualified on his basis and understanding of the nature of reality. Now, this nature of reality, he claims, has given him access to the eternal truth that underlines all human and natural existence. which we can see why Plato would still pick the philosopher. When deciding if I agree with Plato or if I don't, I would have to say that I do disagree. While I do believe that having a leader that is a philosopher and that has a love of wisdom and knowledge and that has not a want or a need for any of the gifts life has to offer, I believe that's great, and I believe that that would further allow for there to be little to no political corruption like there is nowadays. But even as Plato said himself, I do believe that that's just not feasible. And so that's my basis for disagreeing. We are clearly able to see this through quote 11, book 6, 494a, where Plato says that even philosophers fall to the censure of the world. Then in quote 12 from book 6 as well, 495a, Plato goes as far as to say that even the very qualities that make the philosopher great and essentially a great leader also can be ill if he is ill-educated. I do understand what point Plato is trying to make, that in this perfectly drafted state, there is a possibility through the philosopher, the perfect leader, guardian, that we might achieve a state that is the closest thing to completely just, with the lack of political corruption. However, in quote number 13 from book 6, 492a, it specifically states that the philosopher has to be nurtured like a plant. And this analogy is provided as a means of explaining just how much the philosopher and all righteous leader has to be protected from all of the censures of the world. And therefore, I believe that as long as there is a human component to the leader, there's always going to be corruption. And like Plato himself said, with his analogy of the plant and nurturing the plant and how much we have to protect the plant, there's so many